Welcome to Meet at the Table, where warriors are forged. I'm your host, Don Jurl, and let's get right into it. Tonight, the topic is going to be war and prayer. Yesterday at the church, I preached a message on boldness. I preached a message to follow is to fight. One of the points in that message was no time for cowards. God is not looking for wusses. God is looking for warriors. The sad part about it is today's church, because of the feminization of the church, because of the passive teaching that has corrupted the church, for the most part, what do we have? We have cowards. And that cowardness is even in our prayer life. And so again, here tonight, the topic is going to be war and prayer. And I want to go back to 1775 because in 1775 we had a flag, and on that flag there was a phrase, an appeal to heaven. The phrase appeal to heaven is a particular expression of the right of revolution that was used by English philosopher John Locke in his second treatise on government. The work was published in 1690 and rejected the theory of the divine right of kings. In chapter 14 of his writing, he says these words, "And where the body of the people or any single man is derived of their right, or is under the exercise of a power without right, and have no appeal on earth, then they have a liberty to appeal to heaven whenever they judge the cause of sufficient moment." We today have the liberty to appeal to heaven. Matter of fact, we need to appeal to heaven because what he wrote is what we're facing, what we're currently facing. It says, is deprived of their right. Look at the rights that we have been deprived of. You know, we're living in a day and age when people think that the government gives them rights. The government does not give us rights. The government has no power. It has no power. It has no authority to do that. We have God-given rights, inalienable rights. The government does not give us rights, and therefore they cannot take our rights away. They are there for one reason, and one reason only, and that is to protect the God-given rights that we have. And our forefathers knew that. They revolted against the British because they knew that. And on September 7th of 1774, at the opening of the First Continental Congress in Carpenter's Hall, Philadelphia, delegates read Psalm 35 as the assigned reading before delivering the first public prayer of the Congress. The prayer was led by Reverend Jacob Duché, assistant pastor of Christ Church in Philadelphia, and was immediately recognized as one of the most powerful devotional moments of the American Revolution. And the reason I say that is because there's so much teaching, especially in the church today, so much teaching, pray for your enemies, pray for those that despitefully use you. All right. And so with that, I want to give you the prayer that was prayed, the prayer that they read in Psalm chapter 35, and the prayer that was prayed. And it's not the watered down, weak, wimpy, cowardness prayer that is prayed by so many today. It was a biblical prayer, and it was a biblical prayer that should be prayed for those that are trampling underfoot our God-given rights. And so I'm not going to go through all of these verses. I would encourage you to read Psalm chapter 35, but I do want to go through just a few of them. I'm going to read the first 8. This was a Psalm of David. It was a prayer of David. And he says this in Psalm 35, verse 1. Contend, O Lord, with those who contend with me. Fight against those who fight against me. Without going any farther in these verses, and I am, but if I just was to stop right there, and I'm going to, because what David said, just in that first line, if David was to stand up in a church today and say, contend, O Lord, with those who contend with me, fight against those who fight against me, they would run him out of the church. You know, they would go, what in the world? Where's the love at? Well, there was love there. David loved the ways of God, and he loved God so much that he hated evil and those that was bent toward evil. And so then David goes on to say this. He says, take hold of shield and buckler and rise for my help. Draw the spear and javelin against my pursuers. Say to my soul, I am your salvation. He is praying for God to deliver him from his enemies, and in that, he is praying that God would fight against his enemies. He says, Lord, draw your spear, draw your javelin against my pursuers. And then he goes on into verse 4 and says, let them be put to shame and dishonor who seek after my life. And by the way, this was the prayer, again, that was prayed in Carpenter's Hall, Philadelphia. This is one of the reasons why we have this nation. Our forefathers prayed this prayer, God honored that prayer, and God delivered us from the most powerful military at that time. And that was the British Army, okay? It says, let them be put to shame and dishonor who seek after my life. Let them be turned back and disappointed who devise evil against me. Let them be like chaff before the wind, with the angel of the Lord driving them away. And so basically David says, Lord, here's my desire. You know, my enemies, your enemies, those that are coming against us. He says, I want you to send them away like the chaff in the wind. And then he says, let their way be dark and slippery, with the angel of the Lord pursuing them. Again, you don't hear things like this today. And the reason we don't hear things like this today is because we've been told things like this is wrong. Well, how can it be wrong when it's recorded in Scripture? And David prayed it, and David was a man after God's own heart. And then he says this in verse 7, for without cause they hid their net for me. Without cause they dug a pit for my life. He said there was no reason, no reason in what they're doing. It's just pure evil that they're coming against me. He said, I didn't do anything to provoke this. And then in verse 8, let destruction come upon him when he does not know it. And let the net that he hid ensnare him. Let him fall into it, to his destruction. And that was a prayer of David. And that's just one of the prayers. If you read the Psalm time and time again, we see them type prayers. But why don't we hear about that today? Why is there no teaching about that today? Why is it today that, oh no, we got to pray that God open their eyes? All right, yes, there's a time for that. But do you know that there comes a time that God says, I'm done? The prophet Jeremiah, who was known as the weeping prophet, and he was praying and he was pleading, again, all right, so we go back to, he was praying, God, please spare, God, please deliver, God, please open their eyes. And that's what he's praying for the people of Judah. But God said this in Jeremiah chapter 7, verse 16, and really Jeremiah chapter 7, it's another one to read. But in verse 16, God basically says to Jeremiah, do not pray for these people. Do not offer a plea or petition on their behalf, and do not beg me, for I will not listen to you. And so Jeremiah was actually praying for mercy. But God said, you better stop. You better stop right there. I'm not giving mercy. I'm not showing mercy. And so he was, you could say, he was rebuking Jeremiah for praying for mercy, all right? The same way that we're taught today to pray for all situations and for everybody, to never pray that God would remove the wicked. I mean, that's a no-no today. But yet the Bible's filled with it. And here, even though Jeremiah is praying for mercy to be shown to him, God says, absolutely not. You can quit praying this. I'm not going to hear this, and I'm not going to answer this. And why was it? This occurred during a period when the southern kingdom of Judah was deeply entrenched in idolatry, injustice, and moral corruption. Sounds like really where we're at today. And it sounds like where our government is at today, all right? Injustice. I'm not saying the whole thing right now, and there's reasons for that because of algorithms and everything else, and so this video wouldn't get taken down. But there is files, and y'all know what I'm talking about. There is files that basically, you know, it has so many people, Hollywood, government, and everything else that is involved with some of the most just sick acts, all right? And sick, despicable acts with children. Where's the justice on that? And then our government basically comes up and says, once they're, oh, we're going to expose and we're going to prosecute, and we're going to do all these things, and then, oh no, we're going to, flip a coin, we're going to change sides, and we're going to go, no, if we was to prosecute everybody, then the whole government would collapse. Well, good, let it collapse. If it's that corrupt, it needs to collapse, and another government needs to be formed that would honor God and do justice and not be morally corrupt. And so, again, God says, and I'm going to be honest with you, a lot of people today go, well, we need to pray for our government. Yeah, I pray for our government. I pray that God removes the wicked and raises up righteous people to take their place. And that's my prayer. And I don't think I'm wrong in that, because I read it in Scripture. I read it in Psalm 109. I read it in Psalm 35. I read it in all these passages. And I also read where God said to Jeremiah, don't pray for me to be merciful to these people. I'm not going to be, because of the injustice, the idolatry, the moral corruption, and the child sacrifice and the oppression of the vulnerable. And so they're not showing mercy to anybody. And also, there is a biblical principle: we will reap what we sow. And then you look at the child sacrifice today. I mean, you look today that we would pass laws that would allow the killing of a baby at birth. And then you honestly think that, and the church honestly thinks that, oh, well, we just need to pray for God to show mercy. Really? When Jesus himself said that it would be better for a millstone to be put around somebody's neck and them drown in the depths of the sea than hurt one of these little ones? But yet we will take and kill them from the womb, and then have the gall to stand on the steps of Congress and saying, God bless America? How? All right? He's not going to bless that type of stuff. He's not going to bless government that is that wicked that they think it's okay to kill innocent life. He's not going to do that. And so, what should really be our prayer? We ought to go to war in prayer. We ought to pray like Psalm 35. We ought to be praying, Lord, remove the wicked. Lord, destroy the wicked. And that without remedy. If they're not coming to the Lord, then, and I say that a lot of times. I'm like, Lord, you know who's coming to you, and you know who's not coming to you, because you know the end from the beginning. Lord, if they're not going to come to you, and they are committing some of these atrocities, the child sacrifice, the pedophilia, and everything else, all right, that's just sick. If they're committing these type things, then remove them, destroy them, and that without remedy. We got to get some boldness in our prayer life, all right? We need to be warring in prayer. Not only do we need to have boldness in our walk, we need to have boldness in our prayer. And read Psalm chapter 35, all right? And then don't let the modern day watered down church tell you that's not biblical. Yes, it is biblical. And we ought to be doing a little bit more of it. Anyway, if you like the content, please click the like button, subscribe, turn the notification bell on. And until next time, this is Meet at the Table, where warriors are forged. I am your host, Don Jurl, and I'll talk again next week.